Good morning. This is Coffee with Bob. I am very happy to be hosting this morning. It was back in 1994, on this day, April 7th, that the violence of the Rwandan genocide broke out. Now, it didn't just begin on April 7th. The tension had actually been building for quite some time. Back in 1894, the Germans colonized Rwanda. And then in 1918, the Belgians assumed control. And a few years after that, they mandated a census. And they ordered that every single person be issued an identity card which listed their ethnicity, whether they were Hutu or Tutsi. Now, far and away, the largest percentage of the population were the Hutus, but it was the Tutsis who really controlled the country along with the Belgians. And it would be that way all the way until 1959, when a Hutu rebellion overthrew the Belgians and the Tutsis and brought an end to the Tutsi monarchy. By 1962, Rwanda declared its own independence. In the early 1970s, a new president was elected. President Habyarimana was elected, and he was Hutu and brought with him a deep-seated hatred for the Tutsis and made it part of his platform to segregate them and punish them for the years that the Hutus had been kept at bay from power. And so he lived this policy of hatred toward the Tutsis. He spoke it in all of his speeches and in all of his actions. Well, on April 6th, 1994, the plane that he was traveling in was shot down, and he and all the other passengers were killed. The next day, when the news broke out about his death, the Hutus blamed the Tutsis for shooting down the plane. The Tutsis blamed the Hutus, saying they did it to give rise to a race war. And that's when the genocide broke out. And the Hutus organized this sweeping campaign of violence. The radio stations were calling for all Hutus to take their machetes, which most households had one, and go and slay their neighbors. And so this was neighbor to neighbor genocide. After just 100 days, somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people were killed. The vast majority were Tutsis, but many Hutus were killed if they were moderate. If they didn't go along with the mandate to kill the Tutsi people, they were killed. In the middle of all that violence, though, God helped many to be able to survive. Whole villages were wiped out, and yet there would be pockets of survival. And recently I read the story of a sibling group who was able to survive because of staying together. The oldest was a boy about the age of 15 named Flodorar. And he and his 8-year-old brother, his 6-year-old sister, and his 2-year-old sister witnessed the massacre of their parents. He said that God protected him and he hid under the corpses. He said that God gave him strength, and when the soldiers started to leave, he was able to escape with his siblings. Along the way, as they were trying to make it to the next village and the next village, always trying to stay ahead of the violence, they would go days on end without food and water, shelter. They were constantly moving, and they would lose their youngest baby sister. And as he was recounting the story, he said, I just didn't know how to take care of a baby. But he was able to save his brother Cyprian and his sister Glorios because they stayed together, because they drew strength from one another. He said anytime they came across even a distant relative, they would bring them into their small troop of travelers, even though that meant that the very scant resources they had would be divided up even more. They grew stronger together. Nowadays, these three siblings continue to thrive and are more committed to a sense of family than ever before. Flodorar was able to buy the family land and is farming it. His brother Cyprian is a mechanic in the army, and their sister Glorios is at university studying agricultural science. And her greatest goal is to be able to pay for the education of her nieces and nephews. And I was struck when listening to his story of the stark contrast of how at the very beginning, trying to identify which people came from which ethnicity, and how that led to segregation and discrimination, which led to hatred and more violence, and on and on. Separation led to more separation. And yet, in these survival stories, it was about connection. Connection led to strength and survival. The truth is, we are all connected. We are all one family because we were all created in the image of God. We are all brothers and sisters because we are all children of God. The more we try to label one another and distance ourselves from someone who's a different political party, someone who doesn't look like us, someone from a different background, the more we separate, the weaker we get. And we shouldn't be surprised at violence and hatred creeping up in our midst. Our strength and our joy in living comes from connection. We were meant to be together. Today, I hope you find ways to connect with your neighbors, with your family, with other children of God. Have a great day.